Hello and welcome to Draft to Digital Live, Self-Publishing Insiders. My name is Mark Leslie Lefebvre. I'm the Director of Business Development at Draft to Digital. And in the virtual studios with me, but we're also in the same time zone, is Robert J. Sawyer. Welcome, Rob.
Hey, Mark. Good to see you, old friend.
I love that. Live long and prosper. I love that. That is fantastic. Talk about a true science fiction fan. So for those who don't know who Rob is, Robert J. Sawyer was named the Dean of Canadian Science Fiction by the Ottawa Citizen, and you are originally from Ottawa, Ontario. One of only 8 writers in history, and the only Canadian, as I understand it, to win all 3 of science fiction's top honors. Rob is a member of the Order of Canada, which is the highest honor given here in Canada, and the Order of Ontario, which is the highest order given by the province that we both live in. Rob is also one of the initial inductees into the KISFA, which we call it for short, but Canadian Science Fiction and Fantasy Association's Hall of Fame. And according to a U.S. trade journal, Locus, which I'm sure science fiction fans are familiar with, Rob is the author, who is the author of 25 novels. I think it's 25, or are we 26?
I finished the 26, but it's not out yet. So
20. Okay, so it's 25 as of now, but 26 at the publisher. Okay, is the #1 all-time worldwide leader in a number of award wins in science fiction and fantasy, which is why I wanted to talk about theme. But more than all of these awesome accolades that Rob has, is he's been a longtime friend and an incredible mentor, not only to me, but to thousands of writers. Rob, I'm so excited to have you here today.
Well, thank you, Mark. I'm delighted to be here.
So let's get into this. So like you've won all of these awards and the topic of theme. Now this goes back to, now we're both judges of the Writers of the Future. Writers of the Future, volume 41 just came out. So we have a fellow Canadian in there. But you have an article in there that kind of prompted me to want to talk to you about this, because I listened to your talk that you gave to the writers in Hollywood, and your article was called "It Don't Mean a Thing If It Ain't Got That Theme." And that really ties into what we wanted to talk about today, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, I'm a science fiction writer, but I think this actually is quite applicable broadly to a lot of writers in a lot of genres. Most creative writing teachers will tell you, start with a character, or maybe even start with a plot. And I'm not a fan of that process, because what you're doing if you start with simply a character, you're looking for a story. What do you do with this character? I have no idea. Is this character appropriate to the story you're going to tell? You have no idea, because you've started, I think, at the wrong place. The same thing goes with starting with a plot. Plot is great. I mean, plot is, the very definition of story is beginning, middle, and end, a plot. Right. But you're not going to get people thinking about your story after they've finished reading it. And it's when they're thinking about it afterwards that they tell other people, hey, I read this, you got to buy this, this was great. It's when they're thinking about it afterwards and they're again in a bookstore or shopping online where they think, that guy, he's still in my head, I want something else by him. So I'm a huge advocate of starting with your theme, of deciding what it is you want to say, and literally writing it out for yourself in a sentence. And I find it actually very useful to have that sentence as a touchstone when you're going along. So for instance, here's the download of my latest novel over here. What's the theme of the download? I can tell you what the plot is. I can tell you who the characters are. But the theme is that the people that our society judges as having the right stuff, astronauts in the case of this story, and the people we judge as having the wrong stuff, often people who've ended up in a life of crime and being incarcerated, are the exact opposite judgments of what we should be making. That the people that we laud often are not praiseworthy, and the people we discard often are the most valuable people in the world. And that's what I wanted to say thematically. And then you come up with characters to let you explore that. And then you come up with a plot, and then you come up with characters that fit into that theme. But having something to say, a resonant statement, I think is what distinguishes fiction and literature. We all want to be successful fiction writers if you're not a nonfiction writer. But literature are the works that stick with us after you've read them. if you can, and here's my little litmus test, and we'll get on to the questions very quickly. The litmus test is this. If I ask you what a book is about, and your only response is, well, it's about this guy, see, and then this thing happens, and if your only response is a plot synopsis, it's not a thematically driven work. If you ask what the book is about, and people say, well, it's about the fact that even today, but certainly in the Deep South in the past, an African-American man could never get justice, even if he's innocent, right? That's To Kill a Mockingbird. Nobody says To Kill a Mockingbird. Well, it's about these kids playing in the backyard, and then another kid shows up on the fence, and he's visiting from next door, and he says, folks, call me Dill. And it goes on for, you don't give a plot synopsis talking about To Kill a Mockingbird. You don't give a plot synopsis talking about most great books. You give a thematic statement. And if you want to elevate your book, you mentioned all those awards, if you want to elevate your book to the stratum where they get awards, I think you have to talk thematically in your fiction.
Oh, that is fantastic. Now, we do have some specific questions that I will be raising very briefly. So thank you guys for asking them. Feel free to leave them in the comments. But I want to go back to this because, I mean, I think I got to a point after discovering you as a writer of just saying Rob Sawyer is one of those writers I'm just going to buy on site because I know I'm going to enjoy the stuff that he writes. I mean, I love the downloaded. I particularly enjoyed the fact that it was set in Waterloo, not necessarily in
where you are right now.
Yeah, Waterloo, Ontario. So you mean to tell me that it was that theme that you started with before you even got to the whole concept, and then the title, obviously, the downloaded obviously came way after, I imagine, right?
Well, so there's a high concept sometimes even before the theme, because the downloaded was my COVID-19 book, and I think many authors had something that they did during the pandemic, and for me, it was my metaphoric response to the reality of COVID-19. The reality was that we had all started metaphorically living uploaded lives. We had stopped going physically out shopping. That's when the huge boom in e-commerce began. And we stopped going physically to see our friends. We would interact with them on Facebook or on Instagram or by Zoom or whatever and chat. But we knew it was going to come to an end. We knew that the COVID-19 crisis would end. It took a lot longer than it should have because of the stupidity of a lot of people in not dealing in a sensible way with this existential crisis. But we knew it would end. And then we would have to literally or metaphorically download back into reality and start figuring out how to deal with each other face to face again. So that was the germ of the idea. But that's not enough to make an interesting book. What you need is, and what is the point? What point are you going to make? And the point is that when you get back into the nitty-gritty of real life, it's not necessarily the celebrities, not necessarily the famous people who are going to dig in and actually pull us together when we need pulling together. It's the people often that we've said, oh, they're discarded. We've thrown them out of society. We've jailed them or marginalized them in any of a number of other ways. And there are a lot of marginalized characters in the downloaded too. And really, they deserve a place at the table and a centrality in our day-to-day life. And that was the process.
Wow, I always find that so absolutely fascinating. It also lends so perfectly to the way that you promote your books, because I've seen you on, I mean, you've been on television programs and international shows and interviews and on stage. And whenever you talk about your book, you typically don't talk about the plot or any of the details. You do talk about the theme or the motivation or that inspiration, or would you even not even, it's way more than a log line, right?
It really is. For me, what I want to do with my books is spark conversation. You know, there's a commercial category that you don't often see reflected in the self-publishing zeitgeist, and it's called book club fiction. It's those books from the traditional big five publishers that they think are going to be really popular with book discussion groups. I'm not talking about the old-fashioned book club where Doubleday had the book of the month club where no. These are the discussion groups or readers groups that get together, predominantly female. They're mostly women who are in book clubs, but I have spoken to many men-only book clubs. I don't approve of any segregation. I think all things should be mixed, but there are lots of women book clubs, men book clubs. The books that people get into book club fiction that are the ones where a whole group of people say, let's all read this book, are the ones that are thematically rich. People say, yeah, I like the character, I like the plot, or I didn't like this, I didn't like that, or I wish the author hadn't, blah, blah, blah. But what they really end up sinking their teeth into is the subject matter of the book. What's it all about? And really, there are not a lot of venues for self-published authors getting into the promotional level where people are going to be pushed as Oprah's book club or Reese Witherspoon's book club or that sort of thing. But that kind of book, nonetheless, gets the kind of word of mouth recommendations that I think a self-published author needs. Certainly, we all crave people to go and review our book point of sale, right? But they still have to come to the point of sale page to see all those reviews, and we're crossing our fingers that some anonymous algorithm will put us there. But the best way of selling books, I say this, and you know this, Mark, you used to be a professional bookseller. I was for a short time too, in brick and mortar stores, I mean, is word of mouth. Somebody comes in, I want this book. Why do you want it? My friend said I would enjoy it, right? Or, that kind of thing. And it's because it's got something to talk about. Great novels like Catch-22, great novels like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, great novels like Fahrenheit 451, or as we call it here in Canada, Celsius 233, 1984, The Handmaid's Tale. What's The Handmaid's Tale about? It's about men stealing control over women's lives. You say that. You don't say, well, it's about this woman whose name is of Fred, and it's like, oh, she's actually off Red, and it's blah, blah. You don't do that. You talk about the theme, and people rally around those books. And I see it sometimes in science fiction, but not as often as I'd like to see it. There's a lot of mindless escapist action adventure, which is popcorn, and that may be good. If you have a series that is popcorn, but you got a whole bunch of them, you can make a good living self-publishing doing that. Yeah. But if you're doing one-offs, there's no compulsive desire to read the next one. If your last, it was fun. Who else has got something fun? Maybe it's not Robert J. Sawyer or Mark Leslie Lefebvre. Maybe it's this guy over here. You want something that makes people come back over and over to you as their favorite writer. And it may be for some writers that you've got a series that they're addicted to. And I'll say this, one of my favorite writers, Robert B. Parker, who created Spencer, made into multiple versions in television. Spencer for Hire, starring Bob Ulrich, was the most famous version. I love Robert B. Parker, but I felt very little compulsion to read his Jesse Stone series or any of his other works, or his Raymond Chandler faux collaborations. No, it turns out I'm not a fan of the author. And this is the case of so many series writers. You're not actually a fan of this particular author. You're a fan of that series. Right. And the tricky thing, unless that's all you do is a series, is to make sure that your brand is something that makes people think, no, I'm a fan of Rob Sawyer. And in my case, the log line is, I'm a fan of Rob Sawyer because he makes me think. And that works for me. I made a career out of that.
I love that. So you have, of the novels you've written, you do have a few trilogies.
I do.
That you've written. And I mean, and so the downloaded, no, spoiler alert, you are going to be writing a follow-up to it because it was so successful. And I do want to talk a little bit about that business and the way you negotiated things with different publishers and the offer you got. But so the trilogy, so you've got the Wake, Watch, and Wonder, you have the Hominids trilogy, and you have the Farseer trilogy, right?
Three different trilogies, yeah.
Why were those trilogies instead? Is that because the ideas were just that much bigger that you had to...
Honestly, the first time I did trilogy, and we call it sometimes in the business committing trilogy, like it's a crime, right? Because I'd written a novel called Farseer and sent it to my agent in New York, traditionally published back in the day. And he said, I love this, but you killed the main character at the end. I said, yeah, isn't that poignant? He said, no, this should be a series. And so my agent encouraged me to write a second one. And then I did a third one, but I get bored easily. That's part of my problem as a reader and as a writer. As a reader, you as a writer have got to really hold my attention because I've got a million thoughts going on in my head and you want me focusing on the ones that are on your page. You got to really keep me riveted. And as a writer, I was a kind of a book a year guy during my traditional publishing career. That meant I spent on a trilogy 3 years. And by the time of the third book, I was hating the work. I just didn't want to do it anymore. And so my subsequent 2 trilogies, in both cases, it was just I had a giant story. And this is one of those publishing realities. In fantasy, a big brick of a book is commercially viable, 250,000 words, which is, Brandon Sanderson, George R. R. Martin, big fat books are viable. In science fiction, the publishers wanted smaller books. So 85,000 to 100,000 viable in science fiction. And I wanted to tell my big fat book, but because of the vicissitudes of traditional publishing, it ended up being 3 volumes for Hominids, Humans, and Hybrids. And Hominids won the Hugo Award. The sequel, Humans, was nominated for the Hugo. And Wake, Watch, and Wonder, each volume of which separately won Canada's Aurora Award for Best Novel of the Year. So they were all good books. I may have not enjoyed the writing as it went on, but the readers enjoyed the experience of all 3. But an ongoing series would have been anathema to me. It would have been a sentence. You are sentenced, Rob Sawyer, to explore this particular character in this particular world until you die. That would be, for me, not right. Whereas I have great friends who have made wonderful careers. I was great friends with Peter Robinson. I often, as you say, called the Dean of Canadian Science Fiction. He was often called the Dean of Canadian Mystery. Yeah. And Peter was famous for his Inspector Banks series of novels. Yes. That was his career. And we had about the same number of books at the point that Peter sadly passed away, much too young. But his career was writing about Inspector Banks, and my career was all over the place. And I enjoyed my career. I'm sure Peter enjoyed the riches of his career, but I think I enjoyed my career ultimately more. We were on a panel together, just the 2 of us actually, at the Banff Center one year in Banff, Alberta, Canada. And he kept talking about Banks this, Banks that. And I said, Peter, you've written over a dozen books about this guy. You're not on a first name basis with him yet? Alan is the first name of Banks. And he was kind of taken aback, right? But I could not do that. I'm not that kind of writer. And it's to my detriment as a self-published author. There's no doubt that the single best route to self-publishing success is an ongoing series where you feed that audience 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or even 6 times a year with a new book in that series. You have to be prolific, and you have to be content to mine the same vein constantly for that particular route to success in self-publishing.
Well, let's talk about that, because you talk about you being a self-published author, but you also talked about agent. You talked about did contracts with publishers. When, at what point, and I think I'm setting you up because I think I know the answer. At what point, Quantum Night, did some of those things change for you?
Yeah, so Quantum Night was my novel. It came out in 2016, and very topical right now because it's about a psychopathic U.S. president who decides to annex Canada.
Never happened, Rob.
Quantum Night. It was my last book for Penguin Random House Canada and for Ace Science Fiction in the United States. And I loved my editors in both countries, Adrian Kerr in Canada, Jessica Wade in the United States. My agent and I thought this was a really prescient and important book. And we wanted, particularly Ace, who had not been equaling the sales numbers per capita that Penguin had been getting for me in Canada, to really give the book a push. And they did not. And I had the British rights to the book and the audiobook rights to the book initially. And I decided, okay, I'd had a British publisher. I've had several British publishers, including HarperCollins UK and New English Library. We're not getting the push from North American publishers in this book about the annexing of Canada. Sure as hell not going to get it in the UK. So let's self-publish it in the UK and see what happens there. Print in the UK was all self-publishing originally. And also ebooks in the UK. And I had also managed to retain ebooks in North America, which is very hard to do. And the ebooks did get the numbers I wanted for that book. And, you know, don't get me wrong, Quantum Night was a bestseller in Canada and so forth. But it pointed out to me that the traditional publishers who, let's face it, no matter how important your book is to you, it's just one of that month's list of books for that publisher. And lo and behold, 30 days later, they have next month's list of books. And you're already forgotten your last month or 2 months or 6 months or 2 years ago. So I started putting a toehold into self-publishing my work with that book. And with my next book after that, The Oppenheimer Alternative, I said, no way am I giving to a big five, and I've been published by 4 of the big 5 in New York. No way am I going to let them have ebook or audiobook rights, which are so lucrative these days. There we are, the Oppenheimer Alternative, lovely cover by Bibliophile Designs here in Canada. No way I was going to let them have those rights. Well, that meant for the big 5, including Penguin and Ace, which I'd had long-term relationships with. Well, we always get ebook rights. We always get now. We started insisting on audiobook rights. And I said, well, parting of the ways. And so I started doing self-publishing for my ebooks and doing deals directly with Audible for my audiobooks, not through their self-publishing arm, but actually royalties, advance against royalties.
Yeah,
and
not
I've been
ACX,
also doing recorded books. Big pardon?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Not with ACX, but with Audible.
That's
the
right.
company.
That's right. And doing, you know, actual deals with, you know, and in a competitive situation, getting good advances for my audiobook rights and somebody else bearing the production costs. But the ebooks are the sweetest plum in self-publishing. And the big 5, you know, they give you 25% of net proceeds on ebooks. Well, net proceeds are the 70% that's left after Amazon or Kobo or Barnes & Noble through Nook or Apple or Google Play take us 30% skim off. So there's 70% left. Traditional publishing, for the power of pushing the upload button, the publisher wants 3/4 of that 70%, leaving you with 1/4 of 70%, which is 25% of net, or if you work out the math, 17.5% of gross. Whereas if you self-publish an ebook, yeah, you got to pay that same skim off the top, 30%, but 70% comes to you. And so not only do you make more per copy, but we self-publishers all know you have to price your ebooks low. $4.99 US, $5.99 is what I do. Some other authors have different opinions about what the magic price point is. That's worked very well for me. Whereas when Quantum Night was originally, or any of my Ace titles were originally in a hardcover at $25 US, they would bring out an $18.95 ebook. Nobody's going to pay $18.95 for an ebook when the self-publishing marketplace is saturated with things at $2.99 and up. So they were asking for the lion's share and then also torpedoing the marketplace. So I now always do my deals with, I like having a traditional publisher for reasons of vanity, of walking into a bookstore and seeing my book on the shelf. And also because I really enjoy, in Canada, we have a very vigorous literary festival circuit where you can be invited to Vancouver and to Montreal and to Ottawa and to Halifax and Toronto, Kitchener and so forth, and do readings at literary festivals. But almost all of them still have this prejudice against self-published authors. So having even a small press do the print edition has that benefit for me. Gets me into Chapters, gets me into Barnes & Noble, Indigo here in Canada. But the real wealth for me has been in audiobooks and in ebooks these days, and particularly in audiobooks, because Audible likes me a great deal, and they actually commissioned the Downloaded initially, and the sequel to the Downloaded for a very large amount of money.
And they commissioned that probably because of their experience, knowing how well your previous audiobooks had done with
That's right, absolutely. They certainly had looked at what I've been doing for them, and when they wanted to branch out into original production, Audible started very similarly to the way Netflix started. Netflix, back in the days when it only sent actual DVDs to the physical mail, was simply a distributor of other people's content. Now Netflix is one of the biggest production studios in the world and make most of their money off of their original productions. And the way they retain people when there's a huge number of streaming services you could go to. You could be on Paramount Plus, you could be on Disney Plus, but no, you're on Netflix. If you have one service, it's Netflix. And the reason is Netflix said, well, we'll invest so much into original content that those other services won't have. Yes, you can get any studio film, Hollywood studio film on most of the services will have, Apple, or will have, all those films, but the original content, we have the best, the highest quality, and it's only on Netflix. So Audible looked at that and said, we got to do that too. And they looked to see who their best performers were and said, we'll commission new stuff that we'll have and nobody else will have. And when they approached me with that, I said, well, yes, but you're only an audiobook publisher. You can have the audio rights, but I got to have print. I got to have ebooks. And went back and forth. And ultimately, they came to see the wisdom of my model and agreed to the contract that I wanted. And then I was able to exploit ebooks myself for the downloaded and the print, which I chose because of that particular desire of mine to still see it in a physical bookstore and to still be on the A list for the festival circuit. I went with a very small press in Saskatchewan. I was the biggest book they'd ever done. And they vastly underestimated the need for the original print run because of that. And they were going back. We were in third or fourth printing before the first, the official pub date, because the bookstore orders were coming in fast and furious for the book. So I found the particular formula that worked for me. But bottom line, for generally applicability, is those ebook rights, are so lucrative. I was reflecting today on my career as a traditionally published author. In a hardcover situation, an author's royalty starts at 10% of cover price. So there's 90% of the money. If you have now in Canada, a hardcover is about $40 these days, fiction hardcover. So of that $40, 90% of that goes to other people, to middlemen, either the print publisher or the bookstore. Between 44 and 50% goes to the bookstore. A big hunk goes to the publisher, and that 10% left at the end goes to me. So I get on a $40 hardcover, $4. But wait, my agent swoops in and takes his 15% of that $4, which is 60 cents off of my $4. And so I'm down to $3.40 out of a $40 purchase. That seems to me is stunningly ridiculous. Trade paperback, like this format, the large format paperback, the traditional publishing royalty isn't 10%, it's 8%. And mass market paperback royalties for first-time authors are 6%. People are skimming off almost all of the profit from the work that you had created in traditional publishing. Whereas in self-publishing, you can't beat Google or Amazon at their own game. They're going to take that 30%, which is what they take off of Candy Crush. It's what they take off of any app or anything that they send through their pipeline. But still 70% going directly to you feels like you're being finally properly rewarded for the amount of work that goes into writing a book, and that the book is your product, not Penguin Random House's, not name any bookstore chain you want to name. It's not their product, it's your product. Why should they get the lion's share?
Yeah. Oh, that is fantastic. Now, we had some questions and we had some comments that go back to, I'd mentioned the award you had won, right? Like the most awarded science fiction author. And so some of the questions had to do, were sort of related to that. I'm gonna scroll back up and find some. So the first one is a question from Tom. And I think, and before I get to Tom's question, I get to ask mine first. Do you think that it's the themes? Do you think that it's those themes that you put into a book that not only make them appealable to book clubs and discussions and conversation and word of mouth, which is really important marketing, but do you think that has an impact on the awards as well?
I think it has the impact on many of the awards. So, for instance, in science fiction, I've been lucky enough to win both the Academy Award, which is the Nebula, given by the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers Association, and the People's Choice Award, which is the Hugo. So the People's Choice Award, anybody who's a member of WorldCon, the World Science Fiction Convention, can vote on that People's Choice Award. And so their tastes are all over the gamut. They're just consumers.
Yeah.
The Academy Award, the Nebula Award, for instance, is much more a case of wanting to knock the socks off of your colleagues. Your colleagues aren't impressed by plot. They plot. Your colleagues aren't necessarily impressed by characterization. They do characterization. Your colleagues are impressed by, wow, that's really interesting, thorny issue that he's dealt with in a way that says something new and insightful about that issue. The Auroras in Canada, and I'm lucky enough to have won more Auroras than anybody else in history by a wide margin, 16 of them.
I know you've beat me on a few of them too.
I have, but I've been beaten by very good writers too. I have to say, I've lost way more Auroras than I've won, and I'm always pleased to lose because that's what gives the award legitimacy. If I don't, if I won them every single time, because that's just the Sawyer Award, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So the awards that are given by other writers. Right. And I'll say also the arts grants that are given here by the Canada Council for the Arts, the provincial arts councils, very much they're looking for theme. They're looking for you to be talking about an issue. But there are People's Choice Awards, and Dragon Con now has the Dragon Awards, which are the most largest voting award pool now, which is absolutely a People's Choice Awards, and very often just goes to a rip-roaring adventure, and that's perfectly fine. But for the more for juried awards, any award like the Philip K. Dick Award or the John W. Campbell Memorial Award, those almost always will go to a thematically rich work. And certainly for the Academy Awards given by Mystery Writers of America, the Edgars, the Nebulas by the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers Association, the Ritas by the Romance Writers of America, those are more, well, romance maybe not as much, but we'll go to a thematically rich work. And there's lots of thematically rich mystery fiction. Don't get me wrong.
Oh yeah, for sure. So I'm going to get to Tom's question now. Are there seem to be are there some awards programs that kind of have more marketability? So you say, I've won this award, or
I got to be honest here, not a single one of the awards that troll for you to submit your book so that you can get a sticker to put on your self-published book, I think has any impact whatsoever. Okay. There are many of these awards, and a lot of authors spend a lot of money or a lot of time pursuing them and then say, I just won and I'm going to make up one here, the Laurel Award for Best Fantasy Novel of the Year. Nobody puts that award's name into a search engine. So ask yourself, which ones do people search for? Well, the bottom line is, in science fiction, people search for Hugo. They search for Nebula. There is not yet a self-published award for science fiction that anybody in large numbers puts into a search engine. So I want to see all the winners of this award. Whereas there are all kinds of people who have made it kind of a life mission to read all of the Nebula winners, starting with the first one, which was Dune, or all of the Hugo winners, starting way back in 1939. But in terms of awards driving self-published fiction, it's only the awards that actually have cachet in traditional publishing that I think actually help propel sales. I'm being brutally honest here.
Yeah, of course.
There's a whole industry out there that wants you to pay your money, enter your book in this award, and they'll give you the PNG graphics and the JPEG graphics, and you can put them all over your website. Well, guess what? If somebody's come to your website, they're there already. They're not there because they're not searching for those award names in the search box on Kobo or the search box on Kindle or the search box on Nook. They just aren't.
So you've preemptively answered Tom's other question, which was, do you ever pay to enter award programs, and how much is too much?
Never.
And no. 1 penny is too much.
Yeah, and 1 penny is too much. And I say the same thing about contests too. Mark mentioned at the beginning, we're judges for Writers of the Future, which is a big prize money contest, but has no entry fee. And I would not have anything to do with it if there was an entry fee. No, I would not spend a penny on entering an award contest. It's just, I've been very lucky with awards. Pursuit of awards has a certain patina to it of hucksterism. You know, it's all well and good, and we all do it at awards time in traditionally published in science fiction and fantasy. Oh, it's awards time. Let me just remind my followers on Facebook or in my newsletter, this is what I had published last year. Yeah. That's perfectly fine, right? But going around and trying to strong arm people who don't normally vote for an award to vote for an award, there's a distasteful quality to that I just don't like. But no, for all of these things that are out there that say, yeah, pay $5, $10, $50, $100, and you'll be considered for this award. It feeds your ego if you get that little PNG graphic at the end. But it doesn't in any way, shape, or form, I think, enhance your saleability. I'm being brutally honest here.
Yeah, so you're warning us about chasing.
I'm warning you.
Chasing after that whale. Call me ish author.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. Yeah.
All right. So I want to get back to some of the stuff we were talking about earlier. Alyssa says, whoa. I can get behind theme first, but plot before characters.
Oh, okay. So this is why. Let me do it for you. And I understand your skepticism, Alyssa. I think that you do it in a reverse order. So you start with a topic. I had to do a novel as an example of mine, one called Frame Shift, which was a Hugo finalist, and also won Japan's top science fiction award. Frame Shift, all one word, FRAMESHIFT. It's a term from genetics. I started with the topic. I want to write a book about genetics. Knew nothing. I had nothing to say about it. I just knew I wanted this a hot topic, genetics. So I researched it, and as I researched it, I had no preconceptions. There's the original Tor edition. It's now, of course, my own self-published editions in print and in ebook and audio from Audible. Genetics, researched the hell out of genetics and thought, what can I say that's provocative about genetics? And I happen to be a Canadian. And as I was researching, it became apparent to me that here's a provocative thematic statement. The thematic statement is this: the only thing that makes sense in the era of predictive genetic testing is socialized medicine. Everybody is insured for everything at the same cost, which is you're a taxpayer. Everybody's insured for everything. It's the only thing that makes sense, because otherwise insurance is going to morph into, oh, well, we can get your genome, Rob Sawyer, and sequence your genome. Well, you're at high risk for type 2 diabetes. We're not going to insure you against that. You're at high risk for various cancers, but no risk at all for other hereditary cancers. You don't have a genetic propensity to Alzheimer's. We'll insure you for the things you're not going to get and deny insurance to you for the things you are going to get. There's theme, a topic, genetics theme, and then developing a plot. And my plot was, okay, well, I have to somehow get an evil insurance company, and I have to pit it against somebody who is going to be disadvantaged. And then came the character. My character was a Canadian scientist who had discovered that he has the gene for Huntington's disease. Well, Huntington's disease is what's called a tardive disease. It is late onset in life. You can have it. You have it from the moment you're born, the moment you're conceived, the moment the egg and the sperm fuse, you have it. But it doesn't manifest itself often to your 40s, 50s, 60s, or later. So I have a young guy in his early 30s who is, by any medical test you could perform, perfectly healthy and working in Canada, and gets a dream job offer in the United States and finds out that he's being denied health insurance in the United States because of a pre-existing condition written in his genes. So topic, theme, the plot, evil insurance company is going to screw over somebody, and then the character who is most inconvenienced by my theme of the United States. Still, I wrote this novel in 95, came out in 97. Here it is, 2025, still an eminently valuable story to tell in the United States where people don't automatically have health insurance. So yeah, you develop a character who is most uncomfortable with your theme. The character, and I'll give you another example and go back to an award winner. I won the Science Fiction Fantasy Writers of America, as it was called at the time, Nebula Award, for a novel called The Terminal Experiment, also a finalist for the Hugo, also won Canada's Aurora Award. And in it, the theme was, or the plot was, a biomedical engineer who discovers scientific proof for the existence of the human soul. Now, the theme or the character that suggests, the easiest character, there it is, HarperCollins mass market paperback original. The character that first comes to mind, oh, well, okay, so this got to be somebody who's had a near-death experience. He's predisposed to believe in the authenticity of this thing. No, that's the wrong character. It would have been an easy book to write. The right character is a biomedical engineer who, in doing his practicum at university, had to assist in an organ harvesting transplant operation where he discovered we don't actually take organ transplant donors off of life support until after we've harvested the organs. In other words, they're beating heart, they're showing biomedical signs of being alive, and then we rip out the heart, and then they die because of that. And he was desperate to believe that even though there were biomedical signs of life at that point, that the person really was dead, because otherwise he was accessory to murder. A much more nuanced and interesting character than the one who is comfortable with the theme that we've discovered scientific proof that there's a soul that leaves the body at the actual moment of death. Because if it left the body after he had carved into it to carve out the heart, then he's a murderer. You find the person who is most put out by your theme, the person who's most uncomfortable, because we as writers are torturers. Our job is to make miserable the life of our protagonists, to make them go through things that we wouldn't wish on our best friend. And you only find that by knowing your theme and developing a miserable plot to put them through, and having your character being the person who is going to have the hardest time with that plot, not the easiest time.
So let's.
It's a very good question, Alyssa. Very good.
No, thank you, Alyssa. And Andrew asks a question that's kind of ties into that. It says, so do your characters deviate from your themes and plots sometimes? And if so, do you listen to them and follow them, or do you just kind of force them back into the hellhole you've created for them?
First, I got to say in the comments here, because not everybody's going to be seeing the comments. Wow, Robert is the real deal. Well, thank you. I appreciate that very much. So this is something that some authors will say, my characters talk to me. They tell me what to do. Mine never do. I have to say that. I am very much a crafts person. I did a minor, the most useful course I ever did at university, minor in psychology, because characterization is simply the art of dramatizing psychological principles. A character rings true if it actually adheres to what we believe human psychology really is. A character doesn't ring true if, no, nobody ever behaves like that. Nobody would do that, right? So I build my characters brick by brick. And because I have created them brick by brick, they never surprise me. I know what they're going to do. And in fact, I'm seeding things in advance. For instance, the main character in the downloaded is a guy who went to jail and thought he could serve his sentence really quickly in virtual reality. It would seem like 20 years for him, but only 8 months out in the real world, because he really wanted to get back to his daughter, right? And that drove his whole psychology, was when he comes out and finds that not just 20 years, not just 8 months, not 20 years, but 500 years have passed and his daughter is dead. I knew exactly what his reaction was going to be. But there are writers who say, yeah, my characters talk to me. I hear voices in my head, to which I say, therapy is available. It is an option. You can find somebody to help you with that problem. But that's just my approach to characterization. I know there are a lot of people who live vicariously through their characters, and I don't, but I want you, the reader, to do so. So it's a bit of a dichotomy. I am the puppet master who is trying to make you laugh and cry, to feel elation and to feel absolute dejection as I pull the strings. But for me, it is very much, and I'm being brutally honest here, because I don't want you to see the string pulling, but I'm being brutally honest that that's what I am doing as an author, that I'm a conniving son of a bitch who is deliberately manipulating your emotions. And so my characters are tools, along with the language, the words, the prosody, everything that goes into writing fiction, are the tools I use to make my characters talk in your head, but they aren't talking in mine.
Oh my God. This happens every single time I'm lucky enough to get into a conversation with you. The time passes so fast.
Oh, it does. My goodness.
Yeah, we're at 45 minutes already. It was so many great questions. We got to as many as we could. Rob, I'm hoping I can get you to come back for future episodes so we can continue some of the riveting discussion.
Sure. Awesome. Absolutely. I'd be delighted to come back. I see Lexi Green says, I don't know the writers of Game of Thrones sold themes. The Game of Thrones, George R. R. Martin was writing a thematically rich stuff. The people came on afterwards and put a patina on it that's down on them. There are all kinds of ways to do things, Lexi. This is the bottom line here. Take what I've given here, if it's useful for you, and then walk away from it if it isn't. To say, I don't know, or there's another way, or I've heard other people say, of course. And your journey as a writer is to find what works for you. And that's the only thing I'm doing here, is putting on that smorgasbord my particular sampler. Here's my contribution to the potluck dinner. If it's tasty, enjoy it. If not, go in another direction, and best of luck to you.
Awesome. Rob, can you please let listeners know where they can find more about you?
It's celebrating its 30th anniversary this year. I was the first science fiction writer in the world to have a website, and so I scored that URL, sfwriter.com. You'll find everything that you're interested in there about my work.
Oh, awesome.
And on social media, just my name run together, Robert J. Sawyer, no period, no punctuation.
Robert J. Sawyer at, okay, awesome.
And you can find links at Twitter, at Blue Sky, at X, at Patreon. Come to my Patreon.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for hanging out with me. I just want to thank you guys all for watching and for your great questions. If you are interested in not missing awesome guests like Rob, make sure that you like, share, comment, subscribe. Every Thursday at 1 p.m. we have an interview with some awesome person. Sometimes it's an Ask Us Anything chance for you to interact with some really cool people. Be sure to bookmark d2dlive.com so you don't miss out on great guests like Rob. You can always watch these afterwards as well at our YouTube channel. And you can also, if you are interested in checking out self-publishing and taking control of your author IP, you can sign up for a free account at draft2digital.com. Rob, thank you again for hanging out with me today.
Always a pleasure, Mark. Take care, my friend.
Bye, everyone.
Ebooks are great, but there's just something about having your words in print. Something you can hold in your hands, put on a shelf, sign for a reader. That's why we created D2D Print, a print-on-demand service that was built for you. We have free, beautiful templates to give your book a pro look, and we can even convert your ebook cover into a full wraparound cover for print. So many options for you and your books. And you can get started right now at draft2digital.com.